Redditors who work at remote places like forest officers, oil rig workers, etc., what creepy things have you noticed while at work? I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my co-worker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered "oh shit" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, pretty sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotgun shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposely placed in a chair in the middle of the woods, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, what a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I used to work in a ship and we're usually gone 3 to 10 months at a time. I worked night shift, so this meant I would sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anybody else snoring or someone's footsteps because they have to piss or something like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All that ended when there was a short period of time was literally only 2 of us in there, or at least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps. Then it would get a bit faster. Sometimes it'll get a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I look at where the other guys is sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually it comes to an abrupt halt. So I try to sleep it off. During work at night I tried to ask my mate about it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone on this pursuit. Third day I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it starts, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. There it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next until finally it was loud as fuck, tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to the side. There lay the biggest dude I've ever seen on the ship, holding his dick mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I prepared for this guy, in my head, for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another dude while he's gripping his dong when I began this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my annoyance. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment, I realized that his elbow, that which belonged to the fapping arm, is resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eye, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis, off the coast of Scotland. Wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormal creepy, but it can be very unsettling / weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkways 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over grating you can't see the sea below your feet, about 60 m down from feck to sea, but you can hear it, albeit muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving / swaying on high wind / rough seas. Even though it's a fixed leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift and I found it particularly unsettling as you've got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there are about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller headcounts. Usually once a trip I'm hit by this awareness that you are just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land. So if things go wrong it can escalate very quickly. During college that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip. A 50-plus mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things happening, coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail and, being Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off of the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people/people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off of the trail where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then, I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 plus meters away. I check my watch, 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We are 20 miles in. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men, and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path, they are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they were 1/3 of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it is my only way of defending myself, I am more disheveled than I ever have been, especially knowing that a knife is barely defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they are doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only a few extra Mountain House, MRE style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the drawings there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where 2 things are known to happen: stowaways, although I doubt it in this case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There is only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases didn't kill them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I have definitely. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. Essentially, when you're building a ship, all projects are almost happening at the same time. It's not always a ground-up situation. People will be welding crane masts while others are under it welding the floor beneath. There are literally hundreds of people all working on it at the same time. This room had no outer welds whatsoever, which means the welds are from the inside. The theory is that they all welded the different pieces together without realizing they weren't leaving themselves an opening because they all have different jobs and typically don't collaborate. Because the room is sealed on all 6 sides to our knowledge. I doubt it was all 6 sides at once, it would have been the last 2 sides and them thinking the other was leaving an opening. I hope that explains it. I said in an earlier comment there's a possibility that there's an opening between the room and hull. Because it does look sealed at the bottom and top, but due to the size of the ship, I can't rule out it absolutely went all the way to the hull just from looking at the decks above and below. The double bottom is inspected every so often by a third engineer. It's not a place people go because there's not much of a reason. I've only been just to see what it's like, so I never thought about connecting the two. I'm a little late to this thread, but I hope this doesn't get buried because the story still haunts me. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism the county had built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention this all just to show it was basically impossible for anyone, or anything, to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair. Almost like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen pictures of one of those. That alone shook me, as there was no way something of that size should have been able to get through, or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the hell the thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away, not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs and sprint away. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning, walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness. So I could just pack a lunch, and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset usually. Once, when I, the oldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns, and followed a dry creek for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first. But as we got closer, we saw that tarps had been affixed to the ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me. A Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts and, worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the person/s living in the hut, we bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent .22 casings and such. Used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there I had the whole school to myself. Used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I get a call from school security and they want me to come in. When I get there I see a police car too. Uh-oh, I think. They ask me a few questions like, did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night? No, I hadn't, usually have headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen. But the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving, they didn't go out the way they came in, and police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. We live in the woods bordering a massive park system in Alberta. We have bears, lynx, moose, wolves, and cougars. The cougars, well, and moose, scare me more than anything else out here. My cougar story. My husband and I were out hiking an old hunting trail, quite far into the park, with our dog. The dog was super big, a Rottweiler/Irish Wolfhound, and very well trained. He sadly passed away at a fairly young age. We'd been out hiking for about 2 hours and stopped for a rest on a fallen log. We'd been sitting for just a few minutes when suddenly the dog sits up and stares intently into the dense brush bordering the path. After a minute, he jumps up and starts growling intensely, hackles up, standing between us and the brush. We don't see a thing, but we know there's cougars in the area, and not much else is so quiet and hidden out there, so we pack up and start hiking back. The dog is super relieved we're leaving and walks alongside us, checking behind us every so often. We hike back for 10 minutes or so and the dog stops again, staring behind us and starts growling loudly again. We have bear spray, but no gun, and we figure the cougar is following us now. So we keep hiking back, adrenaline high, bear spray out. It goes like that for roughly an hour, hike for a while, dog watching our back and occasionally stopping to snarl/growl at whatever he senses that we don't see. The dog stayed tense the rest of the way back and kept checking over our shoulders, but the last half of the hike back home he didn't growl at anything else at least. Still scared the crap out of us both, and we were super grateful that the dog stuck to us, instead of running off to chase off the cougar, which ends in them being eaten, but was big and aggressive enough to keep the cougar at bay. I live in a rural town and this happens quite often. I have 2 stories with close friends where this happened to their pets. Once my friend actually had to kill a juvenile cougar because he crept up and stole his dog right from beside him. He didn't notice till it was already a few feet away because the dog whimpered and screeched. He chased after the cougar and it fumbled the dog a bit, slowing it down enough to be grabbed by the body. He said he tried everything from jabbing its neck to hitting its head and it just wouldn't budge or let the dog go. He managed to grab a 2x4 and repeatedly bludgeon its neck until it stopped moving. The dog survived with wounds and broken jaw, but just after being free the dog ran home and he followed after her. The neighbors were all shouting at him, calling him a dog beater, and he had literally just fought and won against a cougar. It turns out a whole family of desperate cougars were living under the balcony of a residential preschool, which was right in front of where he was fighting the cougar. The whole family of cogs were probably watching it all happen. The other story is short and sad. My friend left him cat on a leash while he went to work and returned only to not be able to find her. Eventually, after tons of searching, he found his cat's head behind his house in the forest.